Okay. Very excited to get back into these Wednesday classes because it's been a while. I know we did some holiday classes, but starting like a course like this, it's been a while since we've done it. So very excited to get back into it. And thank you all for logging on and joining on this beautiful Wednesday morning. And we will begin just about, I'll give 2 more minutes and then we'll start. So welcome everybody. This course is going to be about different ideas in Judaism, but specifically we're going to learn, the course is entitled Larger Than Life, because what we're going to be understanding is how Judaism applies to the details of our life and where, how do we live as a Jew in all the other aspects of our life? We often associate Judaism with these big rituals or, days like Yom Kippur and going to synagogue on Shabbat and, having a Seder on Passover. And those are amazing. And those are, important mitzvot that we do. But what we're going to be focusing on in this course is, what does Judaism have to teach us about our personal lives, about the day-to-day, the in and out of every day, and how can we live as a Jew in all aspects of our life, not just on Shabbat, not just on Yom Kippur, not just on those special days, but in our day-to-day life, in the everyday routine, how can we implement Jewish values and ethics into our life? And so I think that this is especially apropos during this time because, over the pandemic, there were a lot of these rituals that we were unable to perform, things that we were used to doing, like having a big Passover Seder with tons of guests and family and friends, or coming to synagogue. A lot of people weren't able to come to synagogue even on Yom Kippur, which is, a lot of people identify their Judaism with that. So to be able to understand what Judaism has to teach us in our personal lives is even more important than ever because, we have to know, how do we live as a Jew outside of the synagogue, outside of the daily rituals, the Jewish rituals that we're used to. So this course is 7 weeks, and every Wednesday morning we will focus on another topic. And today's topic, we're going to be understanding the Jewish value of privacy and how that plays out in our life and what is the Jewish perspective. We can all mostly agree that privacy is an important thing. And, it's crucial, but it's hard to pinpoint why that is. What is so important about having privacy in our life? Just to understand this idea and start thinking about it in different ways, there's a book, I'm sure some of you have read it. It's a classic. It's called 1984 by George Orwell. And the premise of the book, just in short, is it's about a dystopian society where the government is oppressive and, they don't let the people express themselves. But, the dictator of this society is called Big Brother. And he watches every person in the society. They're under constant surveillance by this dictator. And they're always being reminded, Big Brother is watching. And this is a way of stripping the people of their identity, is by taking away all of their privacy. They have no privacy in their life. Every single part of their life is being watched by the government. And it just shows the abuse in that situation, where when we have no privacy, it's destructive and it's dangerous for a society. And so in today's world, a lot of people compare today's world to this book. Of course, the book is an extreme, but, we live in a world where social media and the internet and technology has made it possible for us to share the deepest and most intimate parts of our life with the world. With the click of a button, we can literally tell the whole world exactly how we're feeling or exactly what we're going through. And not just in words, we can show pictures and we can show videos, and people are just oversharing on social media, oversharing their life. And people are hooked on, reality TV, where people will literally, like what happens in this book, they attach a body cam to their body, to their clothing, and people are watching every single part of their life, every single detail of their life. And it's entertaining, but it's also shocking that somebody is willing to take their life and put it on display for millions of people across the world. And it just shows that, privacy and modesty, these things are not really valued in our modern society. And so we're going to try to approach it from a Jewish perspective. What is the Jewish perspective on modesty and on privacy, and why is it something that is so important? So I see not everyone has their cameras on, but to make it interactive and to get us thinking about this idea of privacy, we'll do a little exercise. So if everyone knows how to use the chat, you could just press the chat at the bottom, but I'm going to send on the chat like a little key. I'll show you now. So there we go. So this is like a key for the exercise that we're going to be doing. So I'm going to give different scenarios, and each person, if you're comfortable doing so, you can share on the chat. Hi guys. You could share on the chat which number you think, which category of people in your life you find it appropriate to share this information with. So for example, I will say, with whom is it appropriate to share your yearly salary, right? And then you can write, in your own life, there's no right or wrong answer. It's just an exercise to get us thinking about this concept. With whom do you think, which number, like which category of people in your life do you find it acceptable to share this kind of information? So yearly salary, for example, how much money you make. Who would you share that with in your life? So 1 second. So you could send it to everyone. I think that's best, because then we can just all see each other's answers and, try to start thinking about the concept of privacy. So yeah, so most people, this is a more something personal, it's not something that people share. Okay. The next one we'll say is the details of your family vacation. Who would you share that with? I would say, obviously, if you choose like 4, like I just said 4, my coworkers or casual acquaintances, it includes all of the above as well. Yeah. Okay, I'm seeing some answers come in. It's interesting to see that everyone has a different, some are similar, but everyone is different when it comes to these things, Okay, family politics. I would say for myself. So with whom would you personally find it appropriate to share family politics? Okay, it's really interesting to see everybody's answers, because there really is no right answer. There's no wrong answer, and everybody has their own level of comfort when it comes to these things. Okay, we'll do one more. Your children's achievements. Who would you share, stories of your children's achievements with, if you have children? So I'm not going to answer this one. Okay, so this is just an exercise. Thank you all for participating. I think it's really interesting to see that everybody comes to this topic from a different place. And in some areas, we're similar, and in some areas we differ. And we'll come back to this later and see, if our perspective has changed or if, we see it a little bit differently. But thank you all for joining in this little exercise. If anybody has any questions or any comments or wants to share, of course, please unmute yourself and feel free to do so. If you're not comfortable speaking up, you can always message in the chat if you have any questions or you want to share something with the group. So we're going to delve into this topic. And yeah, if you have a question, you can just unmute yourself and say. So we're going to delve into this topic and see where it takes us. And like I said, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask. So we all, from the experiment that we just performed, we all agree that privacy is something that is important, right? I don't think there were any sixes, right? There were no sixes for any of the questions. So clearly everybody agrees that privacy to some extent, obviously it differs for each person, but privacy to some extent is extremely important, right? We don't just share information with anyone or everyone. And the question is why though? What is improper about sharing information with the world? What is it that makes privacy so important? And so in Micha, the prophet, his name was Micha, he says these words. It's a famous quote and it's a beautiful quote. And he says, what is it that God requires from you? What is it that God asks you to do? And he says three things. Number one, to be just, to pursue justice. Number two is to do kindness, to pursue love and kindness. And number three is to walk discreetly with God. So these words, to walk discreetly with God, the word discreet comes from the word tzniut, which is modesty or something that's hidden, something that is private. And we see that he equates this, he puts it in the same sentence as justice and kindness, which we know are, of course, pillars of our Jewish values, to pursue justice and to pursue kindness. And the prophet Micha includes in this list, he includes to be modest and to be discreet and to be, not to flaunt what we have, not to, broadcast information to the world. And it's, this is like the basis of our Jewish value system and why it's so important. And privacy, obviously it starts with sharing your personal information. And the key to that is communication, because when we communicate ourselves to another person, we are sharing our life or our internal world with that person. And we all know Moses was the greatest prophet. And, the rabbis explain, why is it that Moses was the greatest prophet? There were many other prophets in Jewish history, right? We have Jeremiah, we have Samuel, there were many famous prophets. What made Moses the greatest prophet of all? And it says that God spoke to Moses panim el panim, which means face to face. All the other prophets, God spoke to them or he relayed a message to them, but it was always through either symbols or dreams or visions. It wasn't a conversation face to face. Moses had this unique quality where God spoke to him face to face. The words the Torah uses are panim el panim, which means face to face. God spoke to Moses like a friend you would speak to your friend. You would have an open conversation with your friend. That's the way God spoke to Moses. And that's why he was the greatest prophet of all time. And what's interesting, it's always interesting to compare the Hebrew words to the English translation. So the word face, right? We say God spoke to Moses face to face. The definition of the word face is, the front of your head, your forehead to your chin. It's an external part of you, right? That's why we use the word facade, because the word face comes from the word facade, same root, which is, it's implying that it's something external. It's something outside of you. That's why sometimes people will say, put on a brave face or put on a happy face, because we can change our face. It's something external. It's something that we can manipulate. On the other hand, the Hebrew word for face is panim. Panim, the word panim, has the exact opposite connotation from the word face, which is fascinating because the word panim comes from the word pnimiyut, which means internally. When we say in Hebrew the essence of something, when we're trying to describe the essence of a person or the essence of something, we say it's the pnimiyut of whatever it is. Panim implies something very essential and very internal. So I'm just looking at the chat. It says, say it in Hebrew. The word in Hebrew is panim, which comes from the word pnimiut, which is essence or something that's internal. I'm sorry. So we see that when God was speaking to Moses, we translate it as face to face, but the Hebrew words are panim el panim, that he was relating to Moses his internal and most essential desire. And when Moses was speaking to God, he was doing the same thing. He was, expressing his most deep, the deepest parts of himself. And that's why when in a relationship, the foundation and the cornerstone of a relationship is communication. Because when we, in order to have a relationship with somebody, we need to communicate who we are. Like a connection between two people is when there is this energy of understanding, of a deep understanding between the two people. That energy of being seen and being understood, can only take place through a communication. When people communicate their feelings and their their internal world to another person. And so when we communicate to someone else who we are like opening ourselves up and allowing them to see parts of ourselves that we wouldn't necessarily show to other people. And that's why a relationship, if an intimate relationship is, I heard once that the word intimacy comes from, if you read it slowly, it says into me see, right? It's seeing into another person. And when you have a close friend or, the relationship between a husband and wife or a family member, somebody that you are close with, somebody that you can have an intimate, genuine relationship with, it means that you see them. It means that they express to you who they are. And that's why words connect people. Words connect us. They are like the glue of our relationship is our communication. And of course, you can always have small talk. You could talk to anyone. We're not talking about that. We're talking about real deep communication. For example, you can say to someone, what do you do for a living? That's not, they can tell you, oh, I'm a doctor, I'm an accountant. That's not a real communication. If they explain to you why they do what they do, why I chose this path in my life, that is a deep emotional connection where they're expressing themselves to you. So the idea of communication as the foundation for our relationships, what that means is that in order for us to have a relationship, it needs to be, there needs to be a revelation where I show myself to another person. And if somebody is revealing themselves to everyone, to the world at large, then there really is no, there's no intimacy there, right? Because if you're showing yourself to everyone, then nobody is really seeing you. It's like someone who says, I have 100 best friends. No, you don't have 100 best friends. If you have 100 best friends, then either you don't know what a best friend is, or none of them really know who you are, because you can't show yourself to everyone. And there was actually a study done where they looked at people that share excessively on social media. And what they found is that those people were lacking genuine friendships and genuine relationships in their life. And they felt a sense of loneliness, which is opposite what we would think. We would think somebody who's oversharing, how could they feel lonely? Everybody knows everything about them. But the opposite is true, that when a person shares everything about their life to everyone on social media or in general, it actually takes away from that sense of intimacy. It takes away from the connections, because being vulnerable with everyone means being vulnerable with no one, because you've shared with everyone. And so the idea of a conversation, the idea of a connection with somebody being based on a personal, opening up to that person, it has to be in the context of privacy, because when I can only let my guard down if I know that I trust that there's like a boundary here, that there's a border that I can open up to you. Whereas if there's no boundaries and no borders, then nobody is safe to, open up to anyone else. And so that's the idea of connections, and privacy facilitates deep connections, because when we have privacy in our life, we have the safety and the security to open up to the people in our life that are deserving of those connections. And so when God spoke to Moses face to face, he was teaching us that the essence of a connection is to be present and to be personal with another person. There's another fascinating, very important idea when it comes to modesty and privacy in Judaism. There's a story in the Torah after the Jewish people left the land of Egypt and they were traveling through the desert. In the Torah, it says that there was the king of Moab. His name was Balak. And Balak he was an anti-Semite. He hated the Jewish people. And he was intimidated by them. He knew that he couldn't overpower them in war. And so instead, he came up with a new plan. He hired a Gentile prophet or a sorcerer whose name was Bilam. And he hired him to go to the Jewish camp and curse the Jewish people. And Bilam goes to the Jewish encampment and he's about to curse the Jewish people. And when he opens his mouth to curse the Jewish people, instead of curses coming out of his mouth, a miracle occurs that blessings start to come out of Bilam's mouth. And this man, this non-Jewish prophet that was hired to curse the Jewish people, ends up blessing them. And the blessings that Bilam give to the Jewish people are actually blessings that we say every single day in our morning prayers. What does Bilam say? He says, "Ma tovu ahalacha Yaakov," which means, how great are the tents of Jacob. Mishkanotecha Yisrael, which means the dwelling places of Israel. And so what Bilam is saying is he's praising and blessing the encampments, the dwelling places of the Jewish people. And of course, the Talmud comes and asks, what was Bilam seeing that was so praiseworthy? What was it about the Jewish people's homes, about their tents, that was so amazing and worthy of praise? And the Talmud says that Bilam saw something very unique in the Jewish camp. He saw that when the Jewish people set up their tents, they staggered the tents in order for the doors of their tents not to be aligned with each other. So they purposely made it that the doors of each tent were not aligned with each other, and therefore they were unable to see into another person's tent. Each person had privacy in their tent. They had the modesty and the boundaries not to be able to look into another person's home. And that's what he was praising. He was saying a society that is built on this premise of privacy, of personal boundaries, is praiseworthy. And that's what he was blessing when he said, "Ma tovu halacha Yaakov," how great are the tents of the Jewish people. And there's another explanation. Rashi, who is one of the main commentators on the Torah, he actually explains something different. He says what Bilam was praising was that the tribes, right? We have 12 tribes of Israel. The tribes camped together and they didn't intermingle with the other tribes. And now the Talmud's explanation is self-understood. It's very praiseworthy for a society to, base their encampment on, the values of privacy and modesty. That's a very beautiful and praiseworthy thing. But what was so beautiful about the tribes camping separately? What was so important? We might even think that the opposite is true. Maybe intermingling the tribes would even be greater than the tribes camping separately. Why did it have to be that Reuven camped together and the tribe of Shimon camped together? And he was praising the fact that the tribes didn't intermingle when they camped. And so the Hasidic masters explain that each tribe had its own method of serving God. Each tribe had its own way of connecting to God. Of course, we have a Torah and we have the mitzvot, and they are applicable to every person, but each tribe had its own personal way of connecting to God through the mitzvot. And so because each tribe, we often think, sometimes people think that Judaism or religion in general is against self-expression, and it's so monotone and everyone is the same and everyone looks the same and does the same thing. But actually in Judaism, we believe the opposite. Every person has their own unique abilities, unique talents and gifts, God-given gifts, that God doesn't want them to sit idly. He wants us to use those talents to serve him and to make this world a better place. And every person can approach the Torah and approach the mitzvot with their own passions and their own talent. So if somebody is more of a spiritual personality, then they're going to connect to prayer and meditation, and somebody who is more intellectual is going to serve God with their mind through learning Torah. And every person has their own talent and every person has their own passions, and when we use those things to serve God, that is the greatest form of service, because we're not doing it like a robot. We're doing it with our own personal enjoyment and our own personal abilities. And so it's explained that the reason the tribes camped separately and they didn't intermingle is because if they had intermingled, they would start to influence each other and they would lose their unique service of God. And the fact that the tribes camped together, each tribe separately from the next, was so important for them to maintain their identity as a tribe. And so too, each person has their own abilities and their own talents. And in a world where there's so much comparison, there's so much pressure to be a certain way, to look a certain way, to always have a smile on your face, to always be successful, and to always be a certain way, it makes it so difficult to understand who we truly are and to, work on ourselves in a personal way. How can I discover myself when there's so much noise and so much pressure to be the same as everybody else? And so what this is teaching us is that the privacy and the modesty of the Jewish people was connected with the fact that the tribes were separate, because in order to go and make a difference in this world, you first have to know who you are. You first have to have the space to discover yourself. And when there's so much scrutiny and so much comparison, it makes it very hard and very complicated to discover, who am I really? What do I really enjoy? What do I really want to be? Like, what do I want to accomplish in this world? Not what does the world want me to do, or what is popular or what is acceptable. It's about discovering who you really are and what you really need and have to give to this world. And in order to do that, you need that space of, it's almost like looking inwards in order to then give outwards. You can't give to others unless you have yourself what to give. And so this isn't saying that privacy is the end goal. Privacy is like the prerequisite to expressing yourself, because if a person is only expressing themselves and not developing who they really are, then it's meaningless. In order to give and make an impact on the world, you first need to look internally and have the self-awareness to know who you are and what you have to give to the world. And so Bilam was praising the idea that the Jewish people had modesty and privacy on a personal level, meaning each person did not breach the boundaries of another person's home. They didn't peek into another person's house, and they specifically set up their tents in a way that made it impossible to look into another person's personal life. So on a personal level, each person didn't cross that boundary. And also on a communal level, that each tribe remained in its tribe, and they didn't look and compare themselves to another tribe, and they didn't try to be like the other tribes. They maintained their identity and they maintained their personality by staying in their enclosed tribes. And there's a beautiful story, a story that I absolutely love, about a Hasidic master. His name was Reb Zusha. And he lived in the Ukraine. I actually visited his gravesite when I was there last time. And he said to his students once, to me, I think it is so powerful. What he said is, when I pass away, when I go up to heaven, God is not going to ask me, Zusha, why were you not great as Moses? Or Zusha, why were you not as smart as King Solomon? God is going to ask me, Zusha, why weren't you Zusha? Meaning, God doesn't want us to be anyone else. God wants us to be ourselves. He wants us to cultivate and develop the unique talents that he gave us. Each person was given a specific set of abilities, and God wants us to work on those things and bring them out and use them. He doesn't want us to mold ourselves and manipulate our personality to be like someone else. He wants us to be ourselves. And God is not going to compare us to Moses. He's not going to compare us to King Solomon or King David. He's going to compare us to ourselves. He's going to say, this is who you were meant to be. Did you live up to who you were meant to be? Not did you live up to who your neighbor was meant to be or anyone else in this world. Did you live to be who you were meant to be? And the fact that the tribes, made that boundary, made that border, and said, I'm not going to cross over into another tribe because I don't want to be influenced by and try to be like them. I want to cultivate the unique talents that my tribe has. And it shows that in everything, in any self-expression, right? If we want to give to the world, if we want to express ourselves, if we want to connect with the world, the first step is a certain level of privacy, a certain level of self-awareness, of knowing this is who I am, this is what I have to give to the world. And once that is established, then I can go out and make a difference on the world. So we have these two aspects of privacy. Number one, that it cultivates close connections and relationships. And in order for a person to have real intimate relationships in their life, they need a certain level of privacy. And on the other hand, in order to develop yourself away from the comparisons of the world, we first need to take a step back and focus on the parts of ourself that are hidden from the rest of the world. And there's another aspect of privacy that is also really, more spiritual, but really beautiful. And the fact is that the idea is that each person was created in the image of God, right? In the first book of the Torah, when God creates the world, it says that man was created in the image of God. And what that means is that we have certain characteristics that are parallel to God's characteristics. And that's why it says in the Torah, it says that just as God is compassionate, so too you should be compassionate. And just as God is kind, so too you should be kind. Meaning not only that we were created in the image of God, therefore our mission is to imitate God in a way. We have to look at God's attributes and try to, imitate them in our own personal ways. Obviously, much more limited, but just like God shows compassion, so too we have to, work on our compassion. And so Chassidut explains that God has two aspects of himself. He has the revealed part of himself and he has the concealed part of himself. What does this mean? God is infinite, of course, and God chose, when he created the world, he chose to express himself to us. He gave us the Torah, and he chose to express his inner desires and his inner will in the Torah and express it to us. So there was an aspect of God that he chose to reveal to this world. On the other hand, there is a part of God that is concealed, that is completely beyond our scope of understanding, that is beyond our ability to ever understand or grasp, and it's hidden from us, and it's hidden from the world, right? There's revealed godliness and there's concealed godliness. There's the parts of God that we can see in this world, and there are the parts of God that are completely off limits, that we have no ability to understand or see. And just like God has this balance of revelation and concealment, we too, because we were created in the image of God, we too have this dichotomy of there's a part of us that naturally, innately is meant to be expressed to the world. And there's also a part of us that is meant to be concealed, and it's meant to be personal. It's meant to be internal. It's not supposed to be expressed. And so when the idea of, reflecting God in this way of half a part of us is meant to be expressed, and if we don't express it, we're not fulfilling our mission in this world, because God wants you to express that to the world. He wants you to give whatever it is that you have to the world. And that's why we have the part of us that is meant to be expressed. On the other hand, there's a part of us that was never meant to be expressed. It was meant to be personal, private, and modest. And what happens when we achieve that balance of self-expression as well as personal internal self-awareness, what happens is we become closer to God, because we are reflecting him. We are becoming a reflection of him. And that's why the quote that we began with of the prophet Micha, that God wants us to be discreet. It says to walk discreetly with God, meaning when a person walks discreetly through life, when a person has a sacred space within them, creates a space of privacy and personal growth that is not revealed to everyone else, that person walks with God. That person is closer to God as a result of creating that space within them of privacy and personal growth. So if anyone has any questions, of course, please stop me. But I'm going to continue just to touch quickly on the idea of ayin hara, because I think it's something that is relevant to this topic, and it's something that I think there's a lot of misconception surrounding it. So just to explain the idea of ayin hara, a lot of people, they think of it as a bad omen, or like a jinx, something that we don't express certain things because we don't want the ayin hara, we don't want that bad omen to come upon us. So just to clarify this idea, because I think it's really interesting, Kabbalah explains the idea of ayin hara is actually different than what we think. Ayin hara is the idea that there are two perspectives, right? We can see there's ayin hara is the perspective of looking at someone else's success with envy, with jealousy, and with judgment. And on the other hand, ayin tov would be looking at someone else's success with being genuinely happy for their success. And so when we look at somebody else's success with an ayin hara, it's like putting an ayin hara on them. Or if you look at somebody with an ayin tov, if you look at somebody else's success with a good eye, then you are putting a good eye on them. And so it's not actually this like bad omen that we don't want to put on ourselves. It's actually the way we see other people. And so it's explained in Kabbalah. This is a bit of a Kabbalistic concept, so bear with me, but it's explained that God has two attributes. He has the attribute of mercy, which is the attribute of forgiveness and being merciful. And he also has the attribute of judgment, of din, which is it's more exact, right? It's more measure for measure. If a person does a certain thing, then there's a consequence. Or if a person does something good, there is a reward for that good deed. So the attribute of judgment is exact. It's measure for measure. The attribute of mercy is more loose. It's more forgiving. And so, sorry, I'm just reading the chat. Okay, so just like God has these two attributes of mercy and judgment, the way that we look upon another person either brings about God's attribute of mercy or judgment. When we look at a person with an evil eye, God forbid, when we look at a person with judgment or with envy, that brings upon God's judgment. And when we look at a person with a good eye, with being happy for that person and being positive towards that person, that brings about God's attribute of mercy. And so a lot of people that really believe in the ayin hara concept, they will be more modest. They won't like flaunt their success, because they don't want people to look at them with judgment or with envy, because they're trying to avoid that that negative perspective or perception of themselves. So that's the idea of ayin hara. That's why some people are careful not, if you ask somebody, how many children do you have? Sometimes they'll say, Bli ayin hara, I have X amount of children, because what they're saying is, I don't want any envy or, judgment. I don't want you to like be envious or judge me in any way. This is, so I'm not going to flaunt my success or my, the things that I have, because I want to avoid that judgment. That's the idea of ayin hara. And yeah, so just to wrap up those ideas, what we just spoke about is all of the reasons why, or some of the reasons why privacy is important for us, for each person to pursue privacy in their own life, to have a sacred space in their life that is reserved for themselves, or that one person that they are, a spouse or somebody who you have that intimate relationship with. On the other hand, the Torah does give very strict rules or guidelines when it comes to breaching someone else's privacy, right? So when it comes to our own privacy, each person has the responsibility to, protect their own privacy and, choose which level of privacy they want to express or not express, and find that balance in their life of revealing yourself and also, concealing parts of yourself. But the Torah tells us that when it comes to someone else's privacy, there are very clear rules. And, of course, we know about the tents of the Jewish people, that they were forbidden from looking into another person's home. There's a decree of the rabbis that we are forbidden from reading someone else's mail or reading another person's personal correspondences. You're not allowed to read someone else's private conversations with someone else. So that could be looking at someone else's emails or text messages. That would be forbidden according to the Torah. And actually, the idea of lashon hara, which is gossip, is very much connected to this idea of privacy. And I'll explain that the idea of gossiping, it's not only, there are many reasons why gossiping is wrong. And, the most obvious is that you're harming the other person. You're harming yourself because you're giving yourself a negative attitude towards that person. And you're also harming the other person because it's hurtful to speak bad about another person. But when it comes to privacy, speaking gossip about another person is essentially a breach of their privacy, because you are speaking about their personal life and you're speaking about their insecurities and their flaws. And it's none of your business. If they're struggling with a certain flaw or a certain insecurity, you have no right to speak about that. You have no right to, it's like forbidden territory. You have no right to speak about that. It's a breach of their privacy. So gossip is very much connected to the idea of privacy. And this idea is shown, there's a story in the book of Noach, right? We just read Parshat Noach 2 weeks ago, I think. We all know the story of the flood, that God brought upon a flood on the world because the people of the world were evil, and there was one righteous man. His name was Noach, and him and his family were saved. They built the ark. It's a famous story that we all know from the Torah, but the part of the story that not everybody knows is at the end of the book of the chapter of Noach. After the flood finished, the Torah tells us that Noach he planted a vineyard, and he grew grapes. And the Torah tells us is that he drank the wine and got very drunk. And it says that Noah was lying in his tent, completely intoxicated. And it says that he was undressed, he was naked. So he was in a pretty bad state. And Noah had 3 sons. And the Torah says that the first son, he saw his father. The Torah says that he saw his father's nakedness, and he went to inform his other two brothers, that their father was drunk, intoxicated, and naked in the tent. And what words that the Torah uses here are very important. The Torah says that Shem and Yafet, Noach's other two sons, they took a garment and they placed it on their shoulders and they walked backwards and they covered their father's nakedness. And it says that their faces were turned backwards and they did not see their father's nakedness. So just to clarify, Noah has three sons. The first son sees his father's nakedness and he goes and gossips and tells his two brothers that their dad is in this terrible state. And the other two brothers, the Torah says that they turn backwards. They make sure to walk in a way that their faces would not look at their father. And it says that they did not see their father's nakedness. And the Rebbe asks a question and says, why does the Torah repeat itself? We know it's self-understood that if the brothers walked backwards, then they didn't see their father's nakedness. That was the intention, that they wouldn't see it. Why does it have to repeat twice that they didn't see their father's nakedness? And the Rebbe explains that the first verse is speaking of, the physical way that they turned their head away and they walked backwards so that they wouldn't see their father in this state. And the second part of the line where it says that they didn't see their father's nakedness it's referring to their attitude, that when they saw their father in a certain state, they made sure not to pass any judgment. They saw a problem and they saw that they needed to fix the problem, meaning their father was naked and they needed to cover him and they needed to help him in this situation. However, they didn't judge him and they didn't see his flaws. They didn't see his nakedness means that they didn't see any flaw. All they saw was a problem and how they could fix that problem. And I think it's very telling how we can approach sometimes another person's flaws are revealed to us, just, not because we looked in the wrong places, not because we did anything wrong, just we stumbled upon someone else's, negative character traits. And, the question is, how do I deal with this? What do I do in this situation? And the Torah here is teaching us that you can notice a problem and fix the problem without judging it or without seeing it as a flaw or seeing it as something negative. Just like Noah's sons, they saw the problem. They didn't do nothing. They actually fixed the problem. So if something is being revealed to you, if you are noticing something about another person, it means that there's something you can do to help that person. And it does not give you the right or the authority to pass judgment or to, obviously not to gossip about them, but you don't have to see it as a flaw or see it as something negative or judge that person. You can simply see it as something that you have the ability to fix, or you have the ability to help that person in that situation. Like Noah's sons, that they did not see their father's nakedness. Even though they fixed the problem, at the same time, they didn't see it as being negative or being a flaw. And that's the idea of, we have our personal boundaries that we don't want other people to, judge us. And the same thing goes for other people. We shouldn't be judging another person or, speaking negatively about another person, because that would be a breach of their privacy and their personal life. And I think it's a really important idea that if something is being shown to us, it's being shown to us for a reason, meaning God doesn't just put things in our life for no reason. If something is being revealed to us, it's there for a reason, and it's there because we can be of service. We can help that person in that situation. Just one more idea of privacy, and then I guess we'll open up for questions, or if anyone wants to share their own ideas. There's a concept in Judaism that when something is sacred, it is hidden. The more sacred, the more holy something is, the more hidden it is meant to be. And an example of this is the Holy of Holies was the holiest room in the temple, the Kodesh HaKodashim. It was the holiest room. And interestingly enough, there was a curtain that blocked off this room from everyone else. Nobody was ever able to witness what this what happened inside this room, besides for the Kohen Gadol, who was the holiest person, the leader of the generation, the Kohen Gadol, the high priest. On Yom Kippur, once a year, he was allowed to enter into the Kodesh HaKodashim to pray for the Jewish people. However, besides for that one person on that one day, the Kodesh HaKodashim, the Holy of Holies, was completely off limits for everyone else. There was no one who was allowed to look inside of this room. And the reason is, of course, because it was so holy, because it was so sacred, it was off limits. Sometimes in life, the things that are the most holy, the most sacred, are off limits. Classic example is a marriage is the most sacred, most deep connection that two people can have. And therefore, it's personal. It's between those two people. And it is something that is private and hidden from the rest of the world. Or it should be that way. I don't know if it is that way in, like we said, in today's society of technology, but that's the way it should be. A marriage should be something that is sacred, that is off limits to anyone else, because it is the most precious and the most holy thing. And this, of course, brings us to the idea of modesty, right? There's a lot of misconception when it comes to the idea of modest dress, right? Religious women, and specifically Hasidic women, can easily be identified by our modest dress code, that we wear high necks and long sleeves and skirts. And there's, of course, a lot of misunderstandings regarding this idea of our dress code. But I think what's just most important to point out is that, of course, if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer. But I think the idea here is that people think that we cover our bodies, or we cover certain parts of ourselves because they are sinful, or because they are wrong, or bad or negative. And it's actually the exact opposite. We cover our bodies because our bodies are so holy. The woman body is so influential and so powerful and so sacred, and therefore it needs to be covered in certain areas, and therefore it needs to be protected. And it shouldn't be something that is flaunted and that is put out in the open for everyone to see, because it's something that is so sacred, so holy, and so influential. And therefore it cheapens it by flaunting it and putting it out in the open. It cheapens its value. And therefore we look at our bodies as something holy and something private, and something that can have great power and can also be objectified very easily. So that's where, modesty and privacy, it brings out the idea that something that is private is not bad. It's not private because it's bad. It's not kept hidden because it's bad. It's actually the opposite. It's kept private or hidden because it is so sacred. Our personal lives are sacred. Our intimate relationships are holy, are sacred, and therefore they need to be protected. They need to be, boundaries need to be put in place because they are so special and so sacred, not, God forbid, because of the opposite, as some people believe when it comes to modesty. So I think we should take advantage of the chat. If anyone has anything to share, or if you want to unmute yourself and ask any questions, or share some ideas, because this is it's a very nuanced topic. It's something that differs for each person. And it's something that there's a lot of levels and layers to it. So if anyone wants to share a personal question or idea, or something that, a thought that came into their mind, I think that would be a special way to end off. So it's not just me talking. I'm going to read through some of the chat messages and see if there's...
Malka, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Roseanne, hi.
Hi. I thought your talk was amazing. I've never really looked at privacy from the perspective you were talking, and you just touched on so many subjects. But I think what appealed to me the most is the aspect of clothing, protecting the body from a sacred point of view. And that is so true. And so thank you for sharing that. And I just want to say, you speak beautifully. You get your points across so eloquently. And thank you for sharing this beautiful lesson.
Thank you, Roseanne. That's, yeah, it is a really, there's so many, it's a huge topic, and we're just scratching the surface when it comes to modesty and dress specifically. It's something that, there's so much on it, but there's also so much misconception. People think that, I think the biggest one is people think that we dress modestly because of men, or because of other people. Modesty is in order to prevent other people from seeing our body, or like men from seeing our body. And it's actually, modesty has nothing to do, at least the way I understand it. Maybe someone will disagree with me, but modesty has nothing to do with men. Modesty has nothing to do with someone else's lack of refinement or lack of self-control. Modesty has everything to do with the power of the woman, that a woman has so much power, and we want to be taken seriously for who we are inside, for our mind, and for our talents and the amazing abilities that God gave us. And we don't want to be seen just as, something superficial, something external. So yeah, that idea I think is really, really powerful. And yeah, thanks for sharing, Roseanne.
Mm-hmm. And also, with social media, everybody wants to be out there and show their pictures and tell you where they are. And I think in Judaism, humility is so important, because at the end of the day, like you were saying, privacy speaks much louder than publicizing everything.
100%. Yeah, for sure. Um, it's hard because, because of social media, people sometimes feel like if they don't post, if they don't show their life, then they're like, then that's a bad thing, maybe. So it's been all flipped over, that people think, I'm going to be seen as, backwards, or that my life isn't cool enough or good enough if I don't post on social media. And it's actually, like you said, Roseanne, it's the opposite. It's that when a person has parts of their life that are too sacred to show to the rest of the world, that's the most beautiful thing, because it's like, parts of my life cannot be shown to you because it's just too special, it's just too holy.
Absolutely.
So yeah,
Absolutely. And it's a blessing. It's a blessing. It's a blessing, and the blessing has to be nurtured as well, not taken for granted.
yes, very true.
And so what I'm loving is I'm really understanding your concept also of panim at this very moment with you, even though we're doing it virtually.
Right, exactly. I love that. It's so true that, yeah, even over Zoom, we're still gonna have those deep conversations. And it's true, today technology has, we said a lot of, the downsides of technology, but there are so many upsides as well. The fact that you can FaceTime someone and you can create that connection with them over FaceTime, is also really, that's an amazing advantage that we have in 2020, that we can FaceTime someone on the other side of the world, and we can create a close connection with someone even over technology, even over FaceTime.
Mm-hmm.
So it has its advantages as well, 100%. All right, does anyone else? Yeah.
Yes, I like to say that I like very much the comparing to the Shvatim, to our Shvatim, because it shows that really each person has to be an individual and not to be influenced by society or friends. I think this is a very good lesson for teenagers, for girls today, when they start high school and they meet different girls and from different neighborhoods, and how they can get easily influenced. And also, I love very much the thing about Ain Hara, that we have to walk in the way Hashem does, not to criticize anybody. Because the minute we are criticizing somebody, we judge him according to Hashem will judge him.
Exactly. That's exactly the
So
point.
I found it fascinating.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. It's so,
But
yeah, exactly.
yes. So
Amazing.
if I want to show this to my grandchildren, can they watch it? Is it recorded?
Yes, it is recorded. So,
Okay, great.
yeah, it'll either be sent to you in an email, or I think the recordings go on YouTube or Facebook, something like that. So, yeah, it is
Okay.
recorded.
Thank you so much. That's really, really, before you reveal yourself, you really have to learn about yourself.
Exactly. That's exactly the point. You got it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining, and thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
It's been really lovely, and I'll see you next Wednesday.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Malka.
Thank you.
Okay,
We're off
bye.
to a
Have
great
day.
start. Looking forward to learning together Wednesday mornings.
Yes, we
Thank
are.
you.